Today we have Jessica Knoll on the podcast. Jessica is a New York Times bestselling author. You know her from Luckiest Girl Alive and Favorite Sister. And we are going to sit down with her and talk about her career path, her vulnerability, and her next project.
She is coming out with Bright Young Women in the fall of 2023. And she really talks about her creative process in this episode, how she's approached these stories, how she's put her vulnerability on the page. It's so good to see you.
It is so good to see you. So much has happened since you were at the summit.
I
Your
know.
great film. Are you so excited?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a whirlwind. It's all kind of settled down now. So I'm kind of like back in my little writing cave and isolated, just doing the work. But it was really fun to be out there in the world, when the movie was out in the fall. And,
Yeah. So excited. It was so well received. And
Yeah.
there was so much. Okay. So before we get into projects, because we have so exciting. One of the things we want to do on the podcast is you do talk about your projects so much and you
Yeah.
talk about specific things that are happening. We really kind of want to hear your story. We're so intrigued about your grandmother
Yes.
and her writing, but we kind of want to hear your story of how you decided to be a writer, what first sparked that, what who your influencers were, and kind of hear
Yeah.
your story first before we talk about any specific project.
I mean, how far back are we
We can go back to first grade. We don't care.
Well, you had talked about, it's like I saw some of your interviews and you had talked a little bit about the word twirl in fifth grade.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. I wrote that in a short story in the fifth grade, and I remember my teacher be like kind of stopping and looking up at me and saying, like, you have such an amazing vocabulary and like way with words, and just like little things like that. When I was young, I was definitely encouraged in my writing. I don't ever remember a time of like deciding I'm going to be a writer. It was just like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I love to do. And in school, it's something that you're like rewarded for. You can take AP English classes, and I got a writing scholarship to college, and I won a writing contest in high school that awarded a stipend that had to be used for travel. It was like $3,000 and it had to be used for travel. I remember that. And with that money, I went to Europe for the first time. So I think the whole time I was in school, it always felt like writing was something that was practical because it helped me kind of move through academics in a way that was, like rewarding and felt good. I think it's once you graduate and you're out in the real world, you're like, how am I going to make a livelihood off of this? So that was always the challenge, was what do I do with this talent and this passion of mine in like a practical way. And so I was very lost when I first graduated, and I moved to New York and got a job at a talent and literary agency on the advice of one of my professors, who said, if you want to be a writer, like put yourself kind of in the world and be at least on the business end of things. See what sorts of writers and stories literary agents are interested in representing. And it was really, really great advice. That was from from Professor Grant Hawley at my college, Hobart William Smith. And he recently just passed away a couple of months ago, which was really I was so devastated to learn that. And he really did help me get that first job and help kind of orient me in the world. So I started as an assistant, and I wasn't in the literary department. I was in the talent department because it was the only opening they had. And I was terrible at the job, was close to being fired multiple times. I just was not, my brain doesn't work in a way where it was a lot of scheduling and it was a lot of things being canceled. It was a lot of setting up auditions for actors, and then new sides would come in that they would have to learn, and I would have to get them off, in a time. It was just, I am just not organized in that way. And it was very stressful, and I was trying my absolute best, but I was failing. And so it was like, I would have stress dreams all night, and I was like, I have to get out of here. And so I was in New York, and I just started because I just became really resourceful in New York. Like I found Media Bistro, I found Ed 2020, which was like a website that posted jobs in media. And I realized like, oh, I should just go work in media. Like I should be a magazine writer or editor. And so that's how I ended up. It was like a year after, a year into the assistant job at the agency, I started applying to magazine jobs, and I ultimately ended up at Cosmopolitan.
Okay. I'm thinking about Media Bistro. I don't feel like it exists anymore, does it?
I think it does.
But it's not what it was.
It's not what it was. Ed 2020 is still around, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I found a couple. I remember finding good hires on there.
Yeah.
And even like finding jobs for myself on there. And now it's like, it's very different, but the whole media landscape is different.
Everything is very, very different. But at the time it was like, it was such an eye opener. I was like, oh my God, there's this whole world of media. And I loved magazines. Like I still have all my magazines from when I was in middle school, like all my Janes, all my
oh my God, I miss Jane.
We miss magazines.
I miss Jane.
I loved Allure too. Allure was one of my favorite.
The pile used to get before a flight. Oh, I miss that
I go
so
to
much.
airports now and I'm like, I feel disappointed that I haven't spent $80 on a magazine.
I know.
I miss
It's so
magazines.
different. It's so different now. But yeah, they were a big part of my life growing up. And so it was kind of one of those things when I realized like, oh, there are actually people writing this. You know, like it was like just that weird. I'm like, why didn't anyone ever like
bylines?
I'm like, why didn't I'm like telling everyone I want to be a writer. Like, why didn't anyone be like, maybe you should look at a job in journalism? You know, that might be good for you.
When you started at Cosmo, what type of byline did you have? Like, what was your beat? Like, what were you writing on?
My beat. I'm just laughing because because it's. I mean, but just because it's like Cosmo. So I'm
it's like
what other beat is there?
Well, you have like beats within Cosmo. You have like sex, dating. You have beauty. You have like wellness.
Yes, it's true. I was in everything that wasn't beauty and fashion, which was so it was mostly sex, mostly relationships, some career, friendships, like kind of I did it all. I remember when I first started, they asked all the editorial assistants to pitch ideas for a sex story that would be tied to Earth Day because it was some advertising thing. Like we had to mention Earth Day. So they were like, give it to the assistants, let them like pitch a story. And I just started a couple of weeks before, and I think I pitched the head was sexy ways to go green. And I'm
going through all this list.
I know,
all
right?
the most absurd things I could come up with.
Absurd. And then they chose that story, and that was my first byline.
Oh my God.
Which I still have.
So
like
funny.
like how to lose a guy in 10 days. I feel like it's like Andy Anderson.
It very much
that's
is
what
that.
it is.
Except for the idea that you only have like one column or like one thing you write. I'm like, no, we all had like 10 to 12 pages. Like pages being like different stories, and some of them are longer articles. Some of them are like the one page kind of like in every issue sort of thing. So
Well, I've seen that and your transition to writing kind of was stemming from the takeoff of Gone Girl. Is that?
Yeah. So one of the things I did when I worked at Cosmopolitan was I was assistant to two great editors, Isabel Burton and John Searles. And John Searles was also an author. And Kate White, who was the editor-in-chief for most of my time at Cosmo, she did leave kind of in my last year and a half, and a new editor-in-chief came in. But she's also an author, and they both wrote thrillers. And so they were very big and always having like fiction roundups. And so we had like a whole books department, and I had like my books interns. So because at magazines you get like all the advanced copies of novels that are coming out. And so I used to have to do like a big master document for Kate White about like, these are the buzzy books that are coming out like this month, and like ones you should know about or might want to read. And so actually it was Gillian Flynn's second book, Dark Places, that like landed on my desk. I was probably 23 or 24. And an editor her editor had sent it over to me because we were doing like a spring reads roundup or whatever season it was. And I took it home and I binged it in one weekend. And I was like, who is this writer? And I found her, and she, at that point, Dark Places was her second book. So then I gobbled up Sharp Places, which is her first, or Sharp Objects, sorry, which is her first. And then like 2 or 3 years after that, Gone Girl came out, and it was like a huge phenomenon. And I just remember at that point, I'd been encouraged to strike out and write a book on my own by like several people. And I think seeing the just madness around Gone Girl kind of crystallized for me the sort of voice I wanted to write, the kind of story I wanted to write, and also just showed me that, like, because Gillian Flynn came from magazines. She was an editor at Entertainment Weekly for many, many years. And then, you know, as it happens, like, you know, departments are consolidated and there are layoffs, and like media was like, this was probably in 2012. I mean, media was shrieking even then. And it was happening for us at Cosmo. And so I had this feeling of like, I don't know how long for the world this career is going to be. So like, I really do need kind of a plan B. I just don't know how to kind of execute it. But I think seeing the success of what she did, and then also having the encouragement of other people, it kind of gelled in that moment. And I was like, oh, okay, I think I know how to do this now.
Were you writing novels all along, or had you stopped?
No.
You completely were just in.
I never attempted to even write a novel until probably 2012. And I started in magazines in 2007 or 2008. So I really only started attempting here and there, like a page here and there. And I was just like, I don't even know what this is. I don't know what this is about. And then really it was the change at the top of kind of the executive board at Cosmopolitan, when Kate White, our editor-in-chief, you know, was like, I'm leaving magazines. I'm just going to focus on, you know, writing books full time. She'd done that for, you know, she'd been in that position for 15 years. And so like the old guard kind of left, and then the new guard came in, and it was very destabilizing. Like a lot of people were let go because they were going to bring in new people. And I was just very freaked out. I was like, I need to do something. And I think there was something like that lit a fire. It was the fear of like, I might lose my job, or like I'm really being made to dance through my dinner here. That lit a fire in me. And like I started writing, and Ani's voice came to me, and it really just from there just poured out of me.
Okay. In terms of your, you know, of diving into that, so were you still at Cosmo when you started really embracing it? So you had the overlap. It wasn't like, I'm quitting, this is what I'm doing.
Oh, no. I wrote Luckiest Girl Alive. I was working the entire time I wrote it. I wrote probably the first 5 or 6 months I was writing it, I was at Cosmo, and then I moved to Self magazine.
Okay.
And I
R.I.P.
R.I.P. It's still online.
It's still online.
It's a beautiful online magazine, but I was in print.
Like,
I was always in print.
And just to preface, we love print magazines.
We love,
yes.
But one of the editors at Cosmo had moved over to Self, and she was like, come over here. And it was a bigger job. And like I'd been at Cosmo for 5 years, so it was like I was ready for a change. And so I finished writing the book while I was working there, and sold it while I was working there. And I didn't leave that job until about Luckiest Girl Alive came out in May of 2015. And I did not leave my job in magazines until November of 2014, like 5 months before it came out.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did Cosmo know, or I'm sorry, did Self know it was coming out? Like it was
did.
very, okay.
Well, I had to tell them when like I got my book deal and everything. And it was just kind of a weird situation, because after I moved over there was also a change at the top, that there was just always like it was always like editor-in-chiefs, like
transitions,
lots of transitions, and trying to figure things out. And it was a weird kind of, you know, and the editor who had brought me over, who I adored, left. And so then it was like kind of a new guard situation all over again. And I was part of the recent old guard. And I was just like, I told them, I was like, look, I have a book deal, it's coming out. And ostensibly everyone was happy for me, but like it didn't really feel like that. So yeah, it was time to go.
So when you made the decision and the fire got started in your stomach, and, you know, did you immediately start looking for public, like what was that process
Yeah.
for you in terms of like, was it I want to write the book first and then go pitch it, or was it I'm going to go out there with, a treatment and this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah. No, I didn't even know what those words were. So the way it works is for fiction, you have to have your entire manuscript written before you can sell it to a publisher, and you have to have a literary agent first. So normally, anyone who wants to write a novel of fiction would write their manuscript, and then they would send it out to literary agents and try and get representation. But because of that year that I spent working at a town and literary agency, I had become friends with another girl who was also an assistant at the time, and she had stayed when I left and had been promoted to a junior lit agent.
Oh.
So this is where like the serendipity of everything
Yeah,
shows up. But so her name's Alyssa Rubin. She's still my lit agent to this day. But when we were 27, she emailed me and was like, I see you're writing all these bylines at Cosmo. You need to write. When I said like I was encouraged by a lot of people to write a book, she was one of them. And she was like, I need clients. You should write a book. We'll take it out. We'll sell it together. So we really kind of came up together, which is amazing to like just have someone who's like been with me since the beginning. It's like we both knew each other when. So yes. So the way we worked on it, I was like, I would write maybe like 100 pages and then I would send it to her just to feel like I wasn't just doing this in a vacuum, and she would read it and be like, it's really great. Keep going. It's great. And so then once it was finished, she was like, okay, great. Take the winter break, polish it up. And then in the new year, I guess this was 2014, we'll take it out to publishers. And so she took it out, and that's how I got the deal with Simon & Schuster. And then all of the other stuff, the adaptation stuff, that came via my motion picture agent at CAA, who at the time was working with Reese Witherspoon and Bruna Papandrea and their new production company, Pacific Standard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I ended up with them, although obviously that that dissolved a couple of years ago, but initially that was kind of the arrangement. Yeah.
And did you and your agent, did you guys think of it being a film or think of it being a show, or did those conversations start when you initially saw the manuscript and the success and the interest?
Yeah, well, the conversation started about, optioning this to be a film before the book came out.
Okay.
Probably like 6 to 7 months before the book came out.
Okay.
But when I was writing the book, I had no concept of I was just like, I just want to tell this story. And now that I've told the story and I have a book deal, I just want this book to come out and like for people to read it. I feel like it was also now, maybe this is just my perception because I'm so in it, but now it feels like almost immediately, like I feel like if I was a new author starting out now and I'd like written a book, I feel like immediately I would be like, now what do we want to do about like a TV or film deal? Right? Is that just my perception? Because
2020.
It feels, I can't tell because it just feels
wisdom of what you've gone through, right?
There's so much content now.
Yeah.
There's so much content now than there was even in 2015. So it feels like in a good way, there's more opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
People are looking for more content.
Yes.
I think that's a great thing for writers. In 2015, it still felt a little like
a book can be a book.
A book can be a book.
Yeah.
And if there's a deal, it's a big deal.
Right.
Because like not every book becomes a movie or a show.
Right.
Yes.
So in my head when I was writing it, I was just thinking it'll be a book. And the stuff about the adaptation and Reese loving it and all these things, that was like, I never could have imagined anything like that. So.
And then how long after that did Favorite Sister?
I wrote the Favorite Sister. Favorite Sister came out in 2018.
Okay,
so I wrote that. At the time, it felt like it took me so long to write my second book. But now I'm like, it was only 3 years between my 2 books, and 1 year of that is like obviously the book going into production. So I'm like, it really only took me 2 years to write that. I'm like, this one took me like 5 years. So like looking back, I'm like, I thought it was so slow, and I'm like, that was really fast. Like, you were way too hard on yourself.
Right. Do you have multiple projects going at the same time?
Always, yeah.
And who becomes your favorite child? How does that?
It's really hard. And it's something I struggle with, and I talk to other writers about it because it's very common to have a lot of projects going at once, especially if you're doing screenwriting, whether for movies or TV, because it's such weird writing. It's the weirdest writing because it's like you get so many notes from like your producers and executives, but you're just like, does this ultimately go anywhere? Like you can do so much writing on a project years and years and years, and like it'll never see the light of day. It's the strangest thing. So, it really just depends where I'm at in the cycle of things. Like currently, for instance, I have the last pass of my next book with me, which like I'm going through for kind of like with a fine-tooth comb, answering any kind of outstanding like problems with the timeline. Like you said here, this was a year ago, but then so this date has to be, it's like little, you're just tinkering with it, writing the acknowledgments, like the dedication, all of that. You're doing these like last things before it goes into production. That is due tomorrow. But at the same time, I owe a new draft of the pilot episode of Favorite Sister to my producers. And I also I have a notes call tomorrow on another project, a feature that I'm writing for Sony. So I'll have to do another pass of that.
Is that the Reddit?
That's the Reddit thread. I
That's
think
what
my
was
mother-in-law is trying to kill me. So it's like when I turn the book in tomorrow morning, I'm like, I think I'll turn to the
I can't believe
favorite.
you're here today.
I'm like, I'm blown away right now. Like, I have anxiety for you.
This is all. I think I had anxiety about it for a long time until I just realized like this is just how it is. This is how it is for every writer. Yeah. Like I'm not special at all. Like it's a constant, and a lot of it. Sometimes you can kind of figure out the rhythm of it because you're like, ooh, if I turn this in, it's going to take the producers and studio a certain amount of time to read. Then they all have to huddle up. They have to have their committee meeting and then like get back to me, and we have to set a time. So you get like a few weeks. So you're like, okay, so now I can like turn to like this thing. I've figured out a little bit how to manage it. And I think I know the kind of optimal number of projects that I can have kind of going at the same time without feeling like I'm really dropping the ball,
Yeah.
But it took a lot of like kind of pain to get to that point and to not feel like, oh, this person is waiting on this thing from me, which is like not a good feeling if you're trying to like do creative work.
Yeah.
So you can't really like do your best writing if you feel like someone's breathing down your neck. So a lot of it is just like kind of a little bit of a shift in perception of like, these people aren't real. I mean, they want these drafts and things from me as soon as they can get them, but they also, this is the way it works because every other writer they're working with is also juggling most things. So a lot of, the studio and the producers are understanding of the fact that like, it's a bit of a dance,
Yeah.
So I think just like understanding that has like helped me just like feel a little bit more like centered when I sit down to like work on various things. Yeah.
What's your creative process? Like when you're sitting down, do you have like this, like I go into a hole for 2 weeks and this is what, and I just get the work done? Or is there like a setup? Like how do you go about that from a writing perspective?
It is a hole that I go into, and I also used to like beat myself up about it because it's like, it's a hole, but like, it's like a 3 to 4 hour a day hole. And I'm like, that's not really a hole. Like you don't like a hole. Like I used to think like a hole was like you're writing from sun up to sun down. And then if that's what you're doing, fine. Everything in your life can go to shit. Like you're allowed to do that. The truth is I'm not someone who can write from sun up to sundown. I don't know many writers who can. I really am good for a couple of hours a day. It's really concentrated, dedicated work. And then I am laid the fuck out. Like it takes everything out of me. And I've had to just learn to go easier on myself in saying like, if you can't get back to that email, if you can't do that blurb, if you can't read this book, if you can't do this favor, you know, it's even if you only did 4 hours of actual work today, it's okay. Like it's okay. That is really the only way I get things done is a hole of for as long as I can go into it, I stay in that hole. And then when I come out of it, I really, really try to just like be kind to myself. And like if there's not really, if I'm just kind of completely drained and there's not really much else I can do, it is what it is. And then when I turn something in, normally, and I have a breather, normally I'll have a week where I try and catch up on all the administrative things, getting back to, you know, to people who've emailed me, you know, just those like little things that like are part of my business too, but they need to be kind of tended to in a separate headspace.
Yeah.
When you, I mean, you've said in interviews before that when Luckiest Girl Alive, you were going to screenwrite. You were not going to. Is that now that you're busier and you have all these projects, is that something that you think you'll always hold on to your projects and screenwrite? Do you think is there an option or ever a thought to let something go like that?
Yeah, I think I used to be really like my claws were in it and I was like, no one else will touch this unless it's me. I think with TV, it'll be slightly different because there'll be a writer's room. And I got a little taste of that with The Favorite Sister. We did like a mini writer's room in the winter with 2 other great writers. And although ultimately at the end of those 2 weeks, it was on me to write it, the brainstorming sessions and the kind of throwing things around and the, you know, kind of getting your beat sheet of like each act of the episode, like we did all of that together. So I think if anything of mine that is set up to be a TV series goes, I would be always involved as a producer in a producerial role, but maybe in a writer's room, I would say, okay, now this writer is going to go off and write that episode. I think I'd be able to like let it go just because there is so much going on. And I do think now, because I've done it and I know I can do it and I have so many other things that I'm interested in, if something were to come out and someone else wanted to adapt it, yeah, I can see down the line, I would be like, sure, you know.
A little more.
It doesn't have to be me. Yeah.
Is Favorite Sister cast?
It's not. No, gosh, we're nowhere near that. We don't even have
like just gossip. I love the
book. We're not even set up at like a studio or a
okay.
yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So
like,
we're
I can't
we're
wait. I can picture who I want in my head. So.
Yeah. I definitely have my like dream squad, but we've got a lot to do before we can get to that point. Yeah.
What was that process like, even from casting like Mila Kunis and so forth for Luckiest Girl Alive? Was that like what was that like? You were how old at that point?
31 or 32 when we first went out with it. But I'm 39 now, so that was many years ago. It was very exciting at first, and then it was just despair. Like all the time despair. Like I was just like I just don't know how this is ever going to get made, you know? We like can't seem to get everything to align in terms of like, you know, the studio and the producers signing off on casting ideas, and then when we do sign off on them, this person doesn't, you know, reads it and is like, great writing, but it's a pass for me. I mean, that happens so many times with so many things I've written. And so, you know, Luckiest Girl Alive was originally set up at Lionsgate, and it was going to be theatrical release. I mean, in 2015, like there really weren't. I mean, we didn't really watch movies on streamers the way we do now. You know,
it was a different world.
It was a different
consume media.
Yeah, completely. And so it was like a traditional theatrical release. The studio was like, we will only make this with like 3 actresses, all of whom are like Oscar winners and like booked up for the next 5 years. And I'm like, so essentially you're saying you're never going to make this because how when we moved to Netflix, the hope was, oh, it's Netflix. So like they're not going to be, it's not the kind of stakes to get someone to watch something from the comfort of their own home. They're lower than like people having to leave their house, pay for a ticket, get their butt in a seat at the theater. So our thought was like, great, it opens up the world in terms of like how many amazing, talented actresses there are. And we really we have more options now because they're not going to be so scared to say like, we can only have this person that we think will like draw in, a certain audience and, make sure that we like hit those box office numbers. But at the time we got to Netflix, they were weirdly like, they really wanted A-list talent too. This was like 2019. And so they were like, we want to go out to Mila Kunis. And I was like devastated because I was like, she's just going to pass on it. We've done this. We've been down this road before with like that kind of level of star. It's just kind of a tricky character. There's no way she's going to do it. And then she read it and loved it. And so I was like, okay, I'll bite my tongue. So now when people want to take big swings, I'm like, let's do it. Why not? Because like that was a big swing that I was like, this is a waste of our time. It'll probably take her forever to read. And then she's going to pass anyway. And that's not what happened at all. She read it super quick and like responded just as quick, being like, I'm really interested. Let's talk, So yeah.
And were you were happy with the
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I was like couldn't believe it. Yeah.
She's such a good and physically like she's such a perfect fit for Ani
everything.
in the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
With this project that you mentioned, we read about the Reddit project. You have so much of your own stuff going on.
Yeah.
How open are you to help on somebody else's project or get involved? Is that are you flattered when they come to you? Do you want to do things like that?
Well, I mean, help. I mean, they pay me to help.
Right, of course.
I'm not doing anything out of like, I'm like, oh, sure, let me like consult.
Let me do this on Sunday.
Yeah. No, that actually comes up more than I ever anticipated it would in terms of my agents bringing me books that, that are set up at studios with different producers and they need a writer, and like, would you be interested in this? And I would say 9 times out of 10, the answer, I barely even look at it. The answer is just like, no, not because it doesn't sound great and I don't love all the people and the book is probably amazing or it even is a book I've read that is amazing. I just like don't have the time, The part of what I think appealed to me about adapting a viral Reddit thread into a feature-length film was one, it was such a Nick Moorfox is the name of the writer who wrote this short story that went viral on Reddit called My Mother-in-Law Was Poisoning Me, but then I found out why. It was just one of the most interesting and surprising twists I'd ever read. And I obviously read a lot of them because I like to read thrillers. And I like to watch them. Like that's just what I like to like that. Those are my natural preferences. So, this was a twist I did not see coming, but it was also not a twist that made me roll my eyes. It was a twist that I was like, oh, that's thoughtful. Like, and that's really interesting. So I was definitely drawn to it. It wasn't a full, it's a short story, so it's not like a full book. So I think there was also just from a labor level of being able to read something quickly, like very simply, if you send me a book, it's a much bigger, obviously, it's a bigger commitment to have to read that. So I think it just like all moved really quickly because it was such a fast, great read. Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun, and I think also I got to build out a lot of the backstory because, I had to make it into, a hopefully like 100-minute movie length story. So there was a lot I got to do creatively that also made me feel like, oh, okay, I have like some stakes in this too because, I'm fleshing out these characters so that we have a story that can last, for 110 pages.
Oh, wow.
Do you think, and you may have already started doing this, do you see yourself writing directly screenplays versus a novel or something that's going?
I have.
Okay, so you already started.
Yeah. So I wrote in 2018 or 2019, I wrote an original script called Till Death. it's like a homage to the slasher films of the 90s, like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, which were my favorite movies growing up. I sold it to Amazon. It's set up with Lucky Chap, Margot Robbie's production company, and we have Nisha Ganatra attached to direct, who is just the most amazing director. She did The High Note with Tracy Ellis Ross and Dakota Johnson. And I know I love that movie.
Yeah.
And she did Late Night with Mindy Kaling. And so we're working on making something really great together. So I've like done that and I love it. Yeah.
Do you see yourself, are you interested in producing or directing or moving out?
Well, everything I do, I'm a producer on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I don't know that I would. My agent has been on me for some time to like start like kind of a proper production company, but my understanding is that I'm just kind of like I'm not quite there. I feel like I still have too much I want to do. Like I'd like to see one of my other books go as like a TV series and to be on set again and to show run and all these things. So producing anything other than my own projects for now is not something I've done, and I'm just not sure at what point I'll feel ready to set aside my own stuff to to kind of turn my attention to other people's things, but never say never.
And then you have Bright Young Women coming out in October, which we both read and put it down.
Could not put it down.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
It's been a long time to get to this point. Like I said, 5 years. Yeah. My last book came out in 2018. So this comes out in 2023. So yeah.
Yeah. And just the style and how you chose to focus on. My family is like, I'm walking around like, she did not say his name, and these women. I'm like, they're all like, okay, crazy lady. But it's such a need, and it's such a position that, we hear little snippets in the news every once in a while where they'll be like, we're not going to say the name, we're going to talk about the victims.
Yeah.
But that approach, why was that important to you, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so the novel is inspired by one of our country's kind of most infamous serial killers, who, again, I won't say his name because I never say it in the book, but he operated in the 1970s between Seattle, and his final murderous spree happened on a college campus in Tallahassee, Florida in 1978. And there was a recent-ish documentary out about him in 2019, which I watched and was very well done and interesting and all of these things. But I started to just kind of like pick up some chatter online about, how many movies and documentaries have we done about this guy, and like what do we actually know about his victims, of which there are many young women, 35 confirmed, but reports that it could be actually closer to 100. And so I started digging around, and I was actually really bowled over by what I found. Not just that, like, there was very little out there about these women. We all knew almost nothing about them. But also that a lot of the narrative about how brilliant he was, how charismatic he was, how wily he was, all of these things was like actually demonstrably not true. Like there was a lot out there that kind of pointed to him as like, if he were alive in this era, he would just have been like one of the incels, like on January 6th. Like that was the kind of level of like intelligence we're talking. But the way the headlines were written about him were like the New York Times in the 70s called him the all-American sex killer. And they called him brilliant and quiet and Kennedy-esque. And I'm like,
charismatic.
Was everyone like on drugs? Like what? Like if you actually look at the evidence, like it's not true. And so then I just got mad, and being mad is always like a great point.
right.
I think to start any sort of book, like you're just like fire, passion, go. So I imagined what it would be like to be a victim of a serial killer like that, to be a survivor of a serial killer like that. And that's where my characters' stories and their arcs came from. And in the transcripts that I was able to read from the Florida archives, what I found so interesting is that he was identified as the defendant, never as counsel or never as his full name. And a lot had been written about the fact that he was like a brilliant law student and he represented himself in his own murder trial. And I found it absolutely fascinating that the transcript still referred to him as the defendant, because I was like, he wasn't a lawyer. He barely got a year of law school under his belt. He'd been a convicted killer a convicted felon, because he'd been charged with kidnapping longer than he'd ever been a law student. And he barely, he had to fabricate his transcripts to even get into a decent law school. So the fact that the transcripts referred to him as the defendant, I'm like, that's what you were. Like, you weren't a lawyer, you weren't counsel, you weren't even a law student. You were the defendant in a capital murder trial. And so that's how I refer to him in the story.
That's wild.
Yeah.
In terms of writing Luckiest Girl Alive, to writing a book like this, it's like the process had to be a little bit more night and day.
Yeah.
So, in terms of your learnings, it's like, as well as just the process, did you approach this and know what an undertaking it would be?
I did. And I think that's probably why it took me as long as it did, because I was intimidated by it. Because every time I would think about writing this, I'd be like, this feels a little out of my wheelhouse because it's set in the 70s. And like, what do I know about the 70s? What do I know about being a woman in her 20s in the 70s? And like, I only know the kind of very stereotypical idea of like what they wore, how they were treated, you know what I mean? All these things. And I was like, I just don't want it to be, I don't want it to feel one-dimensional, whereas my other two books are contemporary, and like I'm able to really like say everything it is that I feel about, ambition and womanhood and like all of these things, because I'm living it, So I think I tried to talk myself out of it for a while, because I was like, you won't be able to do it justice. That was kind of the negative self-talk. But as I got deeper into the research and the writing and the characters, the thing that just kind of stood out to me is I was like, not all that much has changed.
Right?
Like
The victim shaming and
there's a lot in there that you read. It's a lot less subtle, but I'm like, oh, like I do know a thing or two about this, because it's still a part of our culture, And the really big thing about his victims that always that kind of really came to the surface for me as I was writing this was this idea that he was able to convince his victims to go off with him because he was, polite and well-spoken and handsome and all of these things. And when you actually look at the eyewitness accounts of like other people who were in the vicinity when he would like kind of target his victims, or like women who got away from him, and what they said about him is they were like, he was weird, he was creepy, he was needy, he was annoying, but I didn't want to be rude. So I said yes, because oftentimes he would, have his arm in a sling or something and be like, I need your help with something. And so they would do it against their better judgment. And I was like, wow. I mean, that
still exists.
It's like my whole, my whole life. Like, not my whole life, but like, I'm just like.
We can all relate to it.
We can all relate to feeling like you can't say no to someone who needs your help, even though like your every instinct is like screaming at you, like don't do that. Or even just like simple things like having your boundaries disregarded all of the time, and just in your head being like, well, okay, but this person needs me. And just like kind of the prioritizing of other people's needs and their emotions over your own. I'm like, that is my whole life, actually. And that is very present in the dynamic between him and his victims and his survivors. So I can write about that, So once I kind of got that, like I realized like I can write this story.
Yeah. How big is your research team that helped with this?
It was just me and my assistant, Alice.
Wow.
Yeah, my amazing assistant, Alice. Yeah, she's been with me for a while, and she was really dogged about like getting transcripts and audio clips and all of these things the height of the pandemic, from Florida, which was like, we're on like different time zones and like people weren't always in the office. And and she got them for me. So
Wow.
thank
That's
you, Alice.
Yes. I thought you were going to say, oh, it's 20 people.
Yeah, no.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So I have a story.
Yeah, I know. I'm dying to hear this.
So we had reached out about you being on the podcast, and your team sent us the book, and I looked it up. I knew what it was about. So randomly, so I'm picking my daughter. I have a daughter who's a sophomore in high school, and so I'm picking her up from school, and she goes to a Catholic high school. And I would say people say it's like it's a very religious school.
Okay.
It's not a phone it in Catholic school that's been there 500 years. They're very serious about. So it was, I don't remember what the week was, but maybe it might have been Catholic Schools Week. So they're having mass every day. They're having all school mass every day. And the teachers do their witnesses. So teachers will volunteer to tell a story in front of a class, something very, a miscarriage, something very heartwarming. So her beloved art teacher was there.
Oh.
She went home for the weekend for a family wedding when this happened at Florida State.
Oh, wow.
And the guilt and it just made me cry just talking about
survivor's guilt.
The survivor's guilt. So Kendall, my daughter, is telling me this story. She had no idea about this, no idea that we were doing this. And she's telling me, she's like, Mom, this is, did her witness today. And, there was, and she's kind of like, no, she didn't say his name and neither did her teacher, but she said, when that happened in Florida, did you know that story? And I'm like, of course I know that story. And she's telling me this and I'm like gripping the steering wheel.
Wow.
And I was like, Kendall, this is what we're doing for the podcast. And I said, and Jessica's going to be on. Yeah, she was there. She was a student.
Wow.
Is that crazy?
It is.
And I'll get her maiden. I don't know her maiden name. I'll get it and I'll send it to you. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were not everyone was in the house that weekend. And yeah, I mean, I can't, to be in the house and to have survived, to me, imagining that, and then having to continue to live in the house after, which they did, was also kind of one of those things where I was like, I can like tap into that because it's not unlike being a survivor of assault in high school and like this thing happens and you still have to like go to class every day with, the guys who assaulted you, and you have to be in this environment where everyone is blaming you for the assault. So the idea that you have to remain within the space where like this terrible trauma occurred and you really don't have a choice. I'm like, oh, I can also, that's where I can draw from. That's where I can write. That's where I can imagine in a way that I'm like, I have felt that before, That's unbelievable.
Well, one of the feelings that I kept getting when I was reading the book is, and he touched on it as us as women, being pleasers, making everything okay for everybody.
Yeah.
But her feeling that, to get everything cleaned up and let's bake cookies and let's get everybody back in so that everybody can feel good again.
Yeah.
Like having that on her to, we have that, I think, as women, as caregivers.
Making sure everybody, putting everybody else's needs ahead of yours in so many ways.
And even in that really weird way, like, why do I need to make it okay for everyone to be back in this house so quickly?
Right.
Yeah. And missing her deadlines of the painters. And it was very, you can picture ourselves in that way.
Do you find that writing heals you in some ways? Like, do you find it? Do you find it therapeutic?
I mean, writing Luckiest Girl Alive felt therapeutic, and then everything after that, for the most part, just feels like I try and find that feeling as much as I can, but so I feel I have like so much pressure on me, or like so many deadlines, so many things I have to deliver, that a lot of times it just feels like this is my job that I'm doing. I wouldn't say that writing Luckiest Girl and kind of how that allowed me to eventually come out with my own story and to just be more honest in my own life, that all was part and continues to be part of a healing process. But everything else that I do, it just really feels more like passion. If it's not work, it just feels like passion, which I think is like a very important thing to have in life. And so I just try and see it for that, and to remind myself to be grateful and to have joy about what I do, because this is what I always wanted to do. And life can be so hard and disappointing in so many ways. And so when we have moments of joy, we should, I think, really lean into them. And so I try and think of writing like that, as something that I should look at as like giving me joy and getting joy out of it. Yeah.
That's an amazing approach.
Yeah. I try. Some days I just want to like bash my head against the wall. But
Well, we are. We're also launching. I don't know. It's not a book club.
It's not a book club.
We're calling it the Women in Entertainment Book Nook, and
Oh, cute.
it's really recommendations and
great.
like talking about it. So, whether your childhood, what were your books that you wanted to be a writer from a young, or you saw that? But what books did you read that you loved, whether you were a child or a young person, or even now? Still, what books do you love?
Well, I loved the Babysitter's Club. I read like every Babysitter's Club.
Who did you want to be?
So I was always a mix between Claudia and Stacy, because like Claudia,
it's like I'm. You and I are very close in age, so I completely relate.
Yeah.
To this.
Who did you want to be?
Stacy.
Yeah. Because I liked how into fashion they were, and Claudia was like the artistic one, and like Stacy was like the one that had moved from New York, so she had like she was like chic and like kind of worldly, and then they were like they had their little alliance, and so those were the two that I related to the most.
My stepdaughter Elise just started reading them.
Oh, really?
And she's 10, and like she's like going through, like it was like I gave them to her, and I was like, this is like a moment in time.
Yeah,
it was like a moment for me.
I loved those. Did you read the Alice series too? Because I loved the Alice series. They were like, it was Alice and Elizabeth and Pamela, which I didn't realize until after the fact. One of my main characters in this new book, Bright Young Woman, her name is Pamela. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot that Pamela was one of my favorite characters in the Alice series. Although the Pamela in the Alice series is very different than the Pamela in my book. She is almost like a young Samantha Jones. She's the best. Oh my God, I loved those
I
books.
did not read that.
Oh God, I loved them. And her older 24-year-old brother, Lester, who had a mustache. Like, oh my God, I hope like someone who is listening to this like gets what I'm saying. I loved those books. And then I'm trying to think, like in high school. I mean, in college, I can remember reading In Cold Blood by Truman Capote and being like, just like shook. Like I was just like, that it just was one of those things that really got underneath my skin. The writing, the setting, just the tragedy of that, of the whole thing, of the family, of what happened to like the young daughter in the house, of even the two perpetrators, like just all of it was so just heartrending. So that book made a big impression on me. And recently I absolutely loved I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay, who her last book, The Great Believers, was nominated for the Pulitzer. And so it's a story about a woman going back to her New Hampshire boarding school to teach a course, and she kind of reconciles with a murder of one of her classmates from when she was a student there. And so it's like a murder mystery, but told by a Pulitzer, nominated kind of level writer, which I'm just like, oh, give it to me. Like that's like a Donna, it's like a Donna Tartt kind of level of writing and story. So I absolutely, and The Secret History by Donna Tartt is also one of my standby favorites. I always go back and reread sections of that every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I'm reading Cloud Cuckoo, John Dewar. Is that how you say his name? Remember all the light we cannot see?
All the light
isn't
we
it
cannot-
Anthony?
Yeah, I know
Anthony
her.
Dewar. Is that
Yeah.
his,
You know, I pick up that book every time.
Oh
I'm in
my
a
God, well,
bookstore, and
that
I
book
still
is-
You
haven't
know, I've
read it.
never read it.
It's
I
so
pick it up every
fantastic,
time
but
I'm in a bookstore.
It's so
Oh,
fantastic.
really?
It is. And I'm reading this book. It's called Cloud Cuckoo, I think is what it's called. And
Okay.
again, it's just, oh my gosh, it's so good. But it's that same like
Yeah.
dawn where you're so lost in
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
that
In the
same
atmosphere
feeling.
and all of that. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's like I would say like from a book standpoint, it's like I ebb and flow with where I'm at in terms
Yeah.
of my life.
Yeah.
I just read Simon Van Boy's I want to say all the but
No,
it's not. It's like Love Begins in Winter.
Oh,
And the poetry of it was
Oh.
just incredible. Like it was
Okay.
the words of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually like it was just beautiful. And then
we're
Yeah,
avid readers and
we're-
avid
yeah.
all over the place. But I have to tell you, and this might age me because it was obviously before my time, but my book growing up, The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basiley, Frank Wheeler.
Oh,
guys read
really?
that?
I
I've heard
didn't
of it,
read
but I
it.
haven't
I've
read
heard of it.
It was that. It was a little bit of a mystery. It made me
Mystery, yeah.
love New York because they ran away from home
Yeah.
and hid at the Met. And it was just, it was that same where sophistication.
Yes.
You know, and the sister, and her name was Claudia,
Oh my
which is so
God.
funny. But that was, those are books that just, when you first find that first book that you lose yourself in,
Yeah.
you're a
my
reader
God.
for life.
Yeah.
I mean, you really
I
are.
like the kind of like fun ones that you read in like a sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I
all
just
the
got
brands of the world.
pineapple.
Yes,
pineapple.
yes.
Where it's like
Oh.
pastel cover.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
knows how to write a page turner.
Her and Nancy Thayer just take me to Nantucket. I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like I'll live in like a Nancy Myers movie. Like,
Yeah.
give me a beautiful house with a beautiful kitchen.
They just started filming on her The Perfect Couple, and I guess Nicole
Oh.
Kidman is in it.
Oh,
so-
really?
Oh, that would be good.
It's so funny.
Yeah,
I
read
have
all
some
books.
friends that,
Yeah.
and I'm like, just go. I was like, she has an avid following. Just go get all the rights to all of her books.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
No kidding.
It's wild.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
like, those are the fun books. But yeah.
This new one, Pineapple Street, Jenny Jones.
Oh, I want to read that.
I just started on the plane last
I
night and I
read
was
it, like,
literally.
Okay, that's my
Yeah.
next book.
It's so, I mean, talk about a page turner. I read
Yeah.
180 pages on the flight last night.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
like you. I mean, and everyone says you can't put it down. I would have
And
read
they
all night
have,
if
like,
I
the
wasn't.
fun books and the
Yeah.
page turners. I'm like, those are like, if anyone ever says that about my books, I'm like, it is, to me, that's not like a backhanded compliment in terms of being like, it's not like dense writing. I'm like, it is
Oh.
not easy to write something fun. It is not easy to write a page turner. Like, if everyone could do it, they would do it, Because I just think like
Yeah.
women's fic in particular, it's been said many times before by many people before me, but like, yeah, for a long time, there was a little bit of like, snobbery about
Yeah.
it and
Mhm,
like
mhm.
contempt. And I'm just like, that shit's not easy to write.
Right,
Like,
right?
it's
If you
just
can-
not.
Well, I think it's a matter of like, at the end of the day, when you write, you want to give somebody something, right? It's like a gift to give a book.
Entertainment or
It's entertainment,
knowledge.
transporting
Yeah.
them somewhere,
Yeah.
or teaching them something, or
Right.
exposing them to something. So they all, it's all equal in
Yeah.
terms of what is that gift that you're giving to
Yeah,
the
and what's
reader.
the experience that the reader has? Like, why is the experience with this, highly literary book more valid than the experience of somebody else with a fun book?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
I'm much more of I'm also like more nonfiction, I would say, than
I love.
Yeah.
I mean, I love a good nonfiction, but
like,
I think if you're an avid reader, I don't know anybody that's an avid
Yeah.
reader that doesn't float between
Between
all
them
of
all.
those things.
Yeah.
I love
I'll
it.
float,
Yeah,
but-
yeah.
I like a murder.
A murder mystery. Me too. Me too. What did you
Here's a
read?
question: what are your podcasts that you listen to?
So it's funny. I was very into all those kind of murdery podcasts for a while. And then I just felt like because the market is so saturated, the
Yeah.
quality
Okay.
suffered. So then I didn't know, I would kind of start something and be like,
Yeah.
I can tell that this isn't really well done investigative reporting.
Mhm.
So I think I'm a little like gun shy but if someone gave me a recommendation for like a great podcast, a great crime podcast, I would listen to it in a heartbeat. I think I've just become like overwhelmed with all of the choices, and it's difficult to tell which ones are actually well
Yeah.
done
Yeah.
and which ones are just kind of like reading the wiki page of
Yeah.
and it's
Of
not
it,
really like
yeah.
going deeper,
We're trying to get Kate Winkler Dawson on the podcast, and if you listened to hers, Buried Bones.
Okay. So that's
Absolutely.
when I should listen
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
Okay, got
She's
it.
an investigative, and she goes deep into a story.
Okay.
I think I should know this because I listened to, like, a whole season will be about one.
Yeah.
Yeah, one in a cold case,
Yeah.
or it's so good. But
Yeah.
she just did it. She just wrote a book, but I'm like, I want her on the podcast. So
Okay.
bad.
That's a good recommendation.
Yeah, she's good. Well, Jessica, thank you so
so
much.
much.
Oh
So
my
good to see
gosh,
you.
this has been
Yes.
such a fun talk. I feel like we learned so much.
I know, right?
I want to write. We want to write.
We want to write.
Everyone has a little writer.
We both have
Yeah.
we both have ideas.
Yeah,
It's just a matter of making them come to fruition.
And I'm a mystery. The other book. Have you read The Appeal?
No.
Oh my gosh, that's a good one too. I think I read. That's going to be one of our book nook. Very interesting style. It's written like a detective and his two assistants are trying, and all they have are texts and emails and things like going back on what happened, and that's
And so
about.
the whole book is told like that?
Yes, and the whole book is
wow.
told like that. So they're read
interesting.
all of the emails and texts that happened between all of these people to get to, so at the beginning what happened, but
Yeah.
going back, it's really an interesting style
interesting.
of writing. It's called The Appeal.
I was going to say I started. I think I said this to you like last time we were here. Like I started Agatha Christie's.
Yeah, and this is
Because I'm like it's like
I know.
it never like nobody ever makes you sit down as a kid to read them.
I
and
know.
it's so prevalent.
Yeah.
That I'm like I try to get through the classics.
I do that too, like as an adult. I'm like,
Mhm.
I need, I read Strangers on a Train. Like
Yeah.
all of these
Yeah.
things where I'm like, I need to actually, like, these were never the books they should have been, but
Yeah.
were not assigned to us
Exactly.
Right.
in
Right.
school. And these are my classics. So
And the book Agatha about her when she
Yeah.
made herself go.
Yeah.
That's such a
Yeah.
great book.
it's fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a great story
Yeah.
too. Yeah, no, we could talk about books all
Yeah,
day.
we could do this all day.
Well, thank you so much for
so
being
much,
here, especially with your
ladies.
busy
It's
day
so
you
good
have
to
tomorrow,
see
all
you.
your deadlines.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh. Oh yeah. Tomorrow is kind of a big deadline. But last week was more stressful. Now it's like I'm done. So just like little.
Do you take yourself away for a little vacation when you finish?
I am going to New York next week for something for the new book, and then I booked somewhere for myself by myself for a week. But it's going to be a writer's retreat to get going on my next book.
Oh,
but it
okay.
is at a place I'm excited to go to, and I'm just excited to like also just kind of cut myself off from everyone and everything.
yeah.
So
Any preview on the next book?
no, not yet.
I have to ask.
That'll be the next, the summit.
Next one.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
next
yeah.
summit or
Next
something
summit.
we'll have
Yeah,
you.
we'll do
Yeah.
that.
Well, thank
So.
you again for your
Thank
time.
you. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womenandentertainment.com.